Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Provider Enrollment Group Biller Open Door. We're just going to run through a very brief presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. My name is Samantha Williams. I'm the Provider Enrollment Administrator here at AHCCCS, and I will be leading this Group Biller Open Door meeting and taking everyone through the changes that we're going to be making in the system this weekend. As a disclaimer, this meeting will be used to address upcoming changes to the practice location step on the group biller applications only. Questions that are not related to this topic will not be addressed here today. This meeting will be recorded and will be published on the AHCCCS website to assist those who may not be able to attend today. Any questions in the chat will be reviewed and we'll answer as many live questions as we can today. Any questions not answered will be reviewed and assessed for the appropriate response method. Due to the volume of attendees of this session, all attendees are muted and questions can only be submitted through the chat function. So I wanted to start by discussing what a group biller actually is. So by definition, group billers are organizations electing to act as financial representatives for any provider or group of providers. As of February 18th, 2024, group billers are required to disclose only the pay-to address and cannot add servicing locations on the group biller application. Group billers themselves, as just the group biller, will not have a servicing address in APEP because they're a billing entity only. While they'll be connected to servicing providers, the group biller itself only has a pay-to address. Group billers do not independently provide services to members and as such do not have practice locations. The service addresses for the providers rendering services for the group are captured on the servicing provider's application, not on the group biller application. So there's a visual diagram here that explains the group biller structure. So the group biller organization and application is its own entity. It's basically like the parent of this diagram. So the group biller does not provide services to members. It provides services, billing services for these rendering service providers. These rendering service providers have practice locations. Group billers do not practice. They do not have practice locations. So that is why this change is happening. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at APEP and what this change looks like. So this is an example of the group biller application steps. And what we're talking about and the change that's being made is being made to step 2, the location step. So after this change goes in over the weekend, this location step will be changed to pay 2 for group biller applications. So this is what it looks like currently and what's available to be entered in APEP for a group biller application. But since this is just a group biller, it's not appropriate for the group biller to list a practicing or a servicing location because this makes it look like the group biller is practicing and providing services to our members, but they are not because group billers are a billing entity and they do not provide services. So the intention of this location step is to capture where services are being provided to our members. And in this scenario, this group biller and group billers don't provide services to members. So again, the upcoming change is only to remove these servicing locations from this screen and for this screen to reflect a pay-to address. On that note, adding servicing locations to this screen by itself on the group biller profile is not enough alone to bill today before this change. The service address that is always checked on claims is the rendering service provider's service address. It is not necessary for the group biller profile to list all of these servicing addresses. So for a group biller to check who their servicing providers are, they can go back to their application steps and they can view their servicing provider details. And within their servicing provider details, they're able to view all of their servicing providers that are registered with AHCCCS. So if they appear on this screen, that means that these are the rendering service providers that have applied with Access and have associated with this group biller. So again, the practice locations that are associated live on these rendering service provider profiles, because that is who is providing the service. And so that is where the practice location is captured. So I just wanted to quickly go through how a rendering provider associates with a group in case anyone wasn't aware of that process. So what we're looking at now is a rendering service provider application. So, it could be your radiologists, your MDs, your dentists, your physical therapists, so on and so on. It could be an agency. So you go to your step 5, the associate billing provider and other association steps. And this is what that screen looks like. So it will show, and of course I have the information blacked out for privacy purposes, but it will list any group associations. And on this page, there's a button at the top of this page to add group billers if they need to add them. So this is the page where they, can view any group associations and add any group associations as needed and date them, so on and so forth. Okay, so that is the end of our presentation. As I said, it was going to be very brief. I do have some frequently asked questions that we've received so far about this change, and I'll run through those really quick, and then I'll review some of the questions we have in the chat. So question 1, do I need to create group NPIs for each location? No. If you have multiple locations, you only need one group biller profile with its own NPI. Individual providers and facilities must apply under their own provider type with their own respective NPI. I tried to register one of my rendering providers using the group NPI, and APEP gives me the error that it's already in use. What do I do? Each APEP application must have its own unique NPI. The group biller cannot share an NPI with its rendering providers. Will the change of practice locations to pay to address on the group biller application change my ability to bill for my rendering service providers that are already registered with Access? No. The requirement has always been that group billers must have registered rendering providers with their own respective Access IDs. This system change is clearing up the expectation on the service locations reported for the group biller itself. This change is not impacting billing. It should not impact any current processes as far as billing goes. This change was intended to make sure that the group biller application and profile does not reflect as if group billers as a standalone entity provide services to members, because they do not. They provide billing services for their rendering service providers. Last question, our group bills for physical therapists. Do we need to register the locations the physical therapists practice at individually? The answer is no. Physical therapists are licensed individuals. The locations where they practice are not licensed locations, and Access doesn't register those offices. Only rendering physical therapists need to be registered and should list their practice locations on their own respective application. These locations do not need to be listed in APEP as service locations on the group biller application. This is true for group billers that bill for other individual providers, such as dentists, radiologists, MDs, nurse practitioners, etc. If you have been billing for individual providers, this billing process and your registration requirements are not changing with these system updates. So that is the end of my presentation today, and I can turn it over for questions. I did see somebody ask, please confirm that a provider with a single location does not need to attend this webinar. So I do want to go back. I'm going to display the group biller locations page. So this is what is changing. If you only have one location listed on here, your application is going to look more or less the same after this system change goes through. So once the system change, so if you only have one location, you have one group bill, you have a rendering service provider that are associated to you, nothing is going to change. And the only thing that's going to change for people who visually see this in their APEP application is this screen here will reflect only a pay-to address, and there will no longer be a primary practice location or a servicing location. Okay, so the first question I see is, are you requesting a separate NPI for each location, even if we bill as a group? This would mean we would create an NPI that would not be used for billing, but simply link a location. How would this work? So no, we are not requesting that you create a separate NPI for each location. This change does not require these group providers to go apply for something else so that they can continue billing. Your current billing practices do not have to change. What we're saying with this change is that if you have a service location on just the group biller profile that's listed in this location step, that is not listed as a location step for your rendering service providers. Oh, I'm sorry. The location for practices are collected on the rendering service provider application. So any servicing locations on the group biller profile are going to be removed. So if you have an address listed on the group biller profile that you intend to bill for, you might want to make sure that that address is associated with your rendering services providers. But if you're already billing for them under those addresses, it means they do have those addresses under their profile today. So what we want to make clear is that listing a service address as a location on a group biller profile by itself did not have a bearing. It didn't allow a group biller to bill for those locations. The group biller is allowed to bill for locations that are associated with a rendering service provider, not listed on their own application. Okay, the next question, the notice was sent out with the date of 2/2. We did not receive this notice until yesterday. Even if we started an APEP application on 2/2, that is not enough time for enrollment to be approved. What is AHCCCS's response to this? We cannot have sites drop and risk a massive disruption in care and reimbursement. So this change is not impacting your ability to bill. It is not changing providers' processes for billing. It is an administrative cleanup to remove practice locations from group billers, just the group biller profile, because group billers do not provide services to members. They provide billing services for rendering service providers. We have a main group enrollment. We list all of our facilities under this enrollment and tie all of our doctors. We then separately enroll each provider and link them to our group enrollment. What would be the approach now? How do we tie our locations to our group enrollment? How do we tie our locations to each unique provider? So you have your group enrollment, and the group enrollment has the pay-to address. Once the group enrollment is approved, that's where you go into your rendering provider application. You go to your associate billing providers, and on that associate billing provider screen is where you add the NPI and the access ID for the approved group biller application. So that's how you associate the rendering service provider to the group biller application. To add service locations, Those service locations are handled on the rendering provider application under their location step. So on the rendering providers application, so this, when we're saying rendering provider, we're talking about whoever the group biller is billing for. So whether it's your radiologist, your MD, your dentist, your physical therapist, whoever the group biller is billing on behalf of, their location step will still exist there. So those providers, those individual providers, those rendering service providers still have to report their practice locations on their individual profile. Okay, next question. How will the changes impact the managed care plan? I am worried if locations are dropped, we may not be reimbursed for any of the care we provide. We will come to a complete standstill. We see thousands of patients a week. So this change is not impacting providers' ability to bill. It's not changing anything about billing processes. It's only removing practice locations from being reflected on the group biller application by itself. I received a notice 2 days ago about group biller, but I submitted the application and it is still pending. Do I need to do anything yet? Thank you very much. So if we're referring to a new group biller application, you should not need to do anything. Just know that once the systematic update goes in this weekend, if you do have to go back into the application for any reason prior to the application approval, that step might look different to you than the way you saw it the last time, but you shouldn't have to do anything. How do you decide which location remains active with our current access ID? Will it be based on the primary? That's a great question. So the primary practice location, the pay to address that's entered with the primary practice location is the pay to address that's going to be retained in the group biller. So when that location step changes to pay to, that screen will, from this weekend on, only reflect that pay to address that was previously associated with the primary practice location. The next question says, do I have to pay anything for the access enrollment yet while my application is still pending? If that question is in reference to a group biller application, group billers don't have application fees. So you should not have to pay a fee if it's a group biller application. Okay. CMS doesn't require a separate NPI for each location. If you follow CMS guidelines, how can access? We will have to obtain Medicare approvals with the new NPIs before we can submit to access, correct? That is not correct. So we are not asking, especially, if you're a group biller that bills for these individual providers, we're not telling you that you have to go get all of those locations registered. This is not a change in how we register and enroll providers today. So, the physical therapist is the easiest example. If you have a physical therapist practicing in an office, we're not asking you to get the office location and NPI and get them registered. That's not what we're asking. So no, you do not have to have an NPI for each location. If you have rendering providers that are individuals that you've been billing for at a location, you should have no changes in that process with this system change that's happening this weekend. Next question is, I would appreciate you addressing exactly how to enroll a large group with access when there are more than one employees doing the access group enrollment. We all need access to the same and not transfer the domain every time someone is out on leave or has departed. So this question is not really related to the changes in group biller service locations that's happening this weekend. However, there will be guidance released on the Access website soon regarding domain transfers and granting other people access to provider applications. The next question is, if all service locations are removed from the group biller profile, can group billers continue to bill for professional services such as physician services when those physicians are listed in step 9? Yes. Yes. In general, yes. So as long as that physician that's listed in step 9 has their service locations reported appropriately, because when you do the billing for that physician, that's what they're going to be looking at, is what practice locations does that physician have on their own application. So in general, yes, as long as the physician themselves on their application have their service locations up to date. So this one says, I get information regarding access group billing such as this to my company, but still haven't received my group biller letter. I think it must be lost in the mail. Phone calls and emails to APEP seem to have gone unanswered. So the letters for group billers were sent to correspondence addresses that we have on file. So if there's any concern that you're not receiving a letter that you think you should have, we always encourage providers to review their correspondence information to make sure it's up to date. So that's what we would recommend. So this says, does this mean under the group biller, we should put a PO box address? For the pay to address, I believe you can put whatever your pay to address is, and whatever your pay to address for your primary practice location was before, that's what we're going to be using still. How does this impact applications that are currently in process? All applications, all group biller applications are being updated with this change. So this says we have 5 practice locations and our providers rotate. What do we do in this case? Each location has its own NPI under the same TIN. All 5 of those sites are registered with Access. So in that instance, that's where you want to make sure you're going into your rendering service provider application, which looks like this, and you go into your step 5, and you add that group biller association for any access IDs you have. So if they all have the same TIN and they're all associated with the same group biller, you want to make sure that you're making that association on the rendering provider application. And again, this isn't a change. And so if you've been billing this way after this weekend, this isn't something that's changing. So they had to have been listed like that the whole time anyway, for you to be able to bill for them that way. This says, will there be a walkthrough on how to add locations for an individual since the locations will be under them? So this presentation will be posted on the Access website. And again, it's these steps here. You're going into your rendering provider. Oh, for locations, I'm sorry. I did kind of briefly go into this earlier, but on your rendering provider application, you go into step 2, locations, and there's an add button, and you just have to add their practice location. There are also resources available on the Access website currently as well. There's a couple of guides that take you through each application type, and I know there's one for individuals, and it does show the location step. So using the Access website under APEP, Access Provider Enrollment Portal, and then going to resources, those resources are really helpful to show you how to add locations. Just to clarify, can the pay to address be the same as the service location? If that's what you want it to be, yes. So the next question is, so are we going to need to put the pay to information in the system? So the answer is no. Whatever you had as the pay to address under the primary practice location prior to this change will now reflect, it's going to be retained in the system. So it'll just be reflected in the pay to step on the group biller application because the location step will no longer exist. If we have one group biller and 75 clinic locations, what does that look like? So if you have one group biller and 75 clinics, and those are licensed clinics through ADHS, you'll have your group biller application, and you will have your 75 clinics each have their own application, their own access ID. And each of those clinics will have to associate with the approved group biller application. So the next question is, do we need to add a location in the individual provider profile? If you're billing for that individual at that location today already successfully, that means that that individual already has the address that they need on their profile. So if you bill for someone, if you're a group biller and you bill for an individual and you're getting denials because that individual doesn't have that service address, then that means that you need to do a modification and update that individual provider servicing location. Again, the individual providers, not the group biller. Do we need to add locations for all locations like office space or facilities on the individual profile? So any access ID that you have affiliated with the group biller profile needs to report their practice location. Now, most of your facilities, your clinics, behavioral health outpatient clinics, integrated clinics, most hospitals, those will usually only have one practice location. Most organizations, and your living homes, your SNFs, those usually only have one practice location most of the time. Your individuals, like your MDs, your nurse practitioners, your physical therapists, your dentists, a lot of times they practice at multiple locations. So you just need to make sure that wherever that provider is providing services to members, that their location step in APEP reflects all of their locations that they're going to be billing for. What if a rendering provider works for multiple entities? So that goes back to our rendering provider application. Under your step 5, your associate billing and other providers, or in other associations, you can list, one provider can associate with multiple different groups. So in the example that I show on the screen, this provider actually did have multiple group associations. So if a rendering provider does work for multiple groups, they can associate with multiple groups in the system, as shown here. This says we have 5 practice locations and our providers rotate. What do we do in this case? Each location has its own NPI under the same TIN. All 5 of those sites are registered with Access. So that's the same thing. You would just want to make sure that any rendering provider has any practice location that they intend to bill for listed on their rendering provider profile. So this says, my group biller ID is linked to me as a nurse practitioner rendering services. If I'm providing professional services to other facilities, do I have to link each facility to my APEP profile? So any practice location that you're practicing at needs to be reported as a service location, because again, when you're billing for those locations, the billing, it's going to check if that's an approved location on your profile. But you don't necessarily have to associate with another group if you're adding locations. You don't have to do that. That just depends on how you're doing your billing. The next question says, does that mean that our rendering providers all need to go into their personal APEP account and add the group biller? Well, if the group biller has already been billing for these providers, that means that they're associated already. So if you're using your group biller ID to bill on behalf of these rendering providers, that means that they're already associated with you. If somehow billing is being done directly through their Access ID alone, that could mean that they're not associated with the group biller. So you may want to check that, but like I said, if you as the group biller are already billing for them through your group biller ID, the association should already be there. So actually, that's a good question. This change is not changing any current association. So any rendering service providers that you have under you already, that's not changing. So again, anybody you've been billing for to date, it's not changing. If you've been billing for them, that means they're associated with you. If you're billing, if you're billing for them at these locations, that means they already have those, and they've been paid out. It means that those locations are already associated with that rendering provider appropriately already. This says, does each school a provider provides service that needs to be listed as individual service locations? So no, and that kind of goes back to it's not changing. So for example, we see a lot of school districts as like the group, right? And they have school-based attendant care providers under them. Those are billed as individuals. You do not need to register the school. We don't register schools individually. So if you have the group biller and you have your school-based attendant care providers under you, that's not changing. So no, you don't need to register each school. But you do want to make sure, again, that the rendering service provider, so usually in this case, school-based attendant care, you want to make sure that that individual has all of their appropriate service locations listed on their application. So this next question says, does a new group application have to be approved before provider applications can be submitted since they need to bill under the group NPI? Yeah, in general, yes. So for a rendering service provider to be able to associate to the group biller application has to be said and done and approved with their access ID. So the group biller application is approved, and then after that, the rendering service providers can apply and associate to the group biller application. So the next one is, can an example be given for a school district that has more than one school site? So I think I kind of said it earlier, is like, you have the school district, and I believe right now that the school districts just have their individual service providers, most of the time school-based attendant care. So I'll go back here. So in the instance of a school district, what I've seen in my experience is, the group biller will be the school district. And then you just have your school-based attendant cares down here. So however many there are, right? And on their provider applications, they list on the location step, they'll list the school location and the school name on that step. This says, what if our pay to group biller address is one of our service addresses? Would we need to create a PO box? No, not at all. So if your group biller pay to address is the same address as your servicing address, that is okay. So what we're doing here is we're basically taking the label practice address off of group billers, because group billers don't practice medicine. That they don't provide services to members. So if your pay to address happens to be the same address as a practice location for one of your rendering providers, that's okay. You do not need to go create a separate PO box. This says the rendering providers such as nurse practitioners, MDs, and LPCs must have the same servicing location listed under their individual APEP, correct? Not necessarily, no. I mean, it kind of depends on the group. It depends on the group, and it depends on, one group could have multiple locations. So, you under them, right? And multiple people who work under that group. So, this nurse practitioner might work, at the organization's urgent care, while the MD might only work at the hospital. Their service locations wouldn't necessarily match, but they could still be under the same group biller. So, again, if you have, if you're a group biller and you're billing for a nurse practitioner and an MD, but they have separate practice locations or service locations, that's okay. Because again, it's very possible that these individuals practice at different places. If a provider practices at one location but covers at another location when a provider is out, do they need to show both locations on their application or just their primary? They need to show all locations, because I am pretty sure that if they go to cover and then you bill with the practice location that's not on their profile, it probably will not pay. So the next question is there a process in place where Access can automatically add a physician from the rendering service provider application to the billing provider application? There is not a process for that at the moment. This says, as a group biller for a school district, should I add all the school sites addresses under step 2 location? So you would on the rendering service provider, you're not going to be able to do that on the group biller application at all, because group biller, this is the school district. The rendering service provider is the person who's providing services. So under this person's profile, under step 2 locations, you would add the school sites where they're providing services. So this one says, we have speech therapists and occupational therapists who work for our company. Do they need to request to be associated with our company? I tried to add them under step 5, but it gives me an error. So in order for the group biller to bill on behalf of those speech therapists and occupational therapists, they do have to be added in step 5. If I'm not sure who submitted that question, but if you have any further details, you can put in the chat about what the error is. We might be able to put additional information out about that. So just a little more context on that one, and we'd be happy to help. Okay, so this says, would you mind explaining what this line on the letter that was sent means? And it says, most entity organizations are allowed one servicing location per access ID. This means that a separate application is needed to get a unique access ID for each servicing location. Can you please show me an example using screenshots? So what that means is, so on the Access website, we have available what's called the Provider Enrollment Screening Glossary. And on this, we identify, if it's a facility, agency, organization, or an individual application. And so majority of your FAO, your integrated clinics, your hospitals, your pharmacies, your labs, your clinics, a majority of these are only allowed one service location for one application with one license. So, if you have a clinic, a PTO5 clinic, you cannot list a primary practice location and other servicing locations. Each of those would have to have their own respective applications. This says, it has just been mentioned that if a provider is not linked to the correct location, the claim will deny. Provider can't be linked to the location if all the locations are deleted and the new access ID application is in process. What happens then? So again, we're not deleting practice locations on these rendering service providers. So if these rendering service, we're not removing anything from rendering service provider applications. We're only removing them from the group biller. So if there's a new access ID that's in process, meaning it's not approved, you can't bill for that location anyway. So again, after this change, the only thing we're doing is removing practice locations from the group biller, because group billers do not have practice locations by the definition of what they are. Group billers are a billing entity. They do not practice. They do not serve our members. They are billing entities for rendering service providers. Rendering service providers, they do practice. They do have practice locations. Okay, so we are almost at time. Also, I've gotten to the end of most of the questions that we are able to address in our meeting today. So with that, I really do hope that this session has cleared up a little bit about these group biller changes. Again, this is not going to change the way that you currently bill. None of these changes are changing your ability to bill from what they were last week to what they will be next week. It's only removing service addresses from group biller applications, because group billers do not provide services to members. Group billers bill. They don't provide services. So we are going to be posting this on the Access website, and we're going to triage these questions that have been asked, and we'll try to put some help material out there for everybody so that everyone can understand, and so that we can help as much as we can. Okay, that is all for today. Thank you everyone for joining us, and everybody have a wonderful day.